The breaking point, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Jessica Rivera adjusted her son's position in her arms for the third time. Tommy's small body felt hot against her chest, his breathing shallow and wheezy. At 6 years old, he should have been running around a playground, not sitting quietly in a corner of her office cubicle, coloring with broken crayons while fighting an asthma attack. "Mama, I'm sleepy," Tommy whispered, his voice scratchy from the morning's coughing fit. "I know, sweetheart. Just a little longer. Okay." Jessica smoothed down his curly brown hair, her heart aching. She glanced around the bustling office of Morrison Financial, hoping no one would notice the small figure hunched over a coloring book beside her desk. She had tried everything. Called every babysitter on her list, begged her neighbor, even considered taking another sick day. But Tommy's fever had spiked at dawn, and she was already walking a tightrope with her attendance record. 3 missed days this month because of his asthma attacks. 2 warnings from her supervisor. 1 more absence would mean termination, and she couldn't afford that. Not with rent due next week, and Tommy's inhaler prescription running low. The morning crawled by like thick honey. Jessica typed reports with one hand, while keeping the other on Tommy's back, feeling for the telltale signs of his breathing becoming more labored. He was trying so hard to be quiet, to be invisible. It broke her heart. How well a 6-year-old had learned to make himself small. At 10:30, disaster struck. Jessica Rivera. The voice cut through the office chatter like a blade. Margaret Morrison, the company president, stood at the entrance to the cubicle maze. Her steel-gray hair pulled into a perfect bun, her expression colder than winter rain. Every head in the office turned. Keyboards fell silent. Even the copy machine seemed to pause mid-cycle. Jessica's blood ran cold as she felt 30 pairs of eyes lock onto her and Tommy. "Ma'am." Jessica stood slowly, instinctively pulling Tommy closer. Margaret's gaze dropped. To the small boy, then back to Jessica. Conference room. Now. The walk down the hallway felt endless. Jessica's heels clicked against the polished floor while Tommy clung to her hand, his breathing becoming more rapid with anxiety. Through the glass walls of the conference room, he could see other employees pretending not to stare. Margaret closed the door with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot. "Explain to me why there is a child in my office," Margaret said, her voice dangerously quiet. Jessica's throat felt dry. "Mrs. Morrison, I can explain. Tommy has asthma, and he had an attack this morning. Couldn't find anyone to watch him, and I've already used my sick days. Stop." Margaret held up a perfectly manicured hand. "Do you think this is a daycare center, Jessica?" "No, ma'am. Of course not. It's just that company policy is crystal clear. No children on the premises, no exceptions." Margaret's pale blue eyes were like chips of ice. "This is a professional environment, not a playground." Tommy coughed, a deep, wet sound that made Jessica wince. She rubbed his back in slow circles, the way she had done countless nights when he couldn't sleep because he couldn't breathe. "He's sick," Jessica said quietly. "I had nowhere else to take him. That's not my problem." Margaret opened a folder on the conference table. "Your attendance record shows 3 absences this month. 2 written warnings.
Stored.
And now this flagrant violation of company policy." Jessica felt the world tilting beneath her feet. "Mrs. Morrison, please. I work hard. I stay late. I've never missed a deadline. You're terminated. Effective immediately." The words hit Jessica like a physical blow. She actually staggered back a step, her grip tightening on Tommy's hand. "What?" "Clean out your desk. Security will escort you out." Margaret's voice held no emotion, as if she were discussing the weather. "Your final paycheck will be mailed." "Please," Jessica heard herself say, hating the desperation in her voice. "I need this job. Tommy needs his medicine. And our insurance should have thought about that before you decided to use my office as a babysitting service." Tommy started crying. Not the loud, dramatic tears of a normal 6-year-old, but the quiet hiccuping. Sobs of a child who had learned that making noise only made things worse. Each tear felt like a dagger through Jessica's heart. "You're making a mistake," Jessica said, her voice stronger now, anger beginning to burn through the shock. I'm a good employee. I've worked here for 2 years without a single complaint about my performance. And now you've worked here for 2 years and one day too long? Margaret opened the conference room door. Security. 20 minutes later, Jessica stood on the sidewalk outside Morrison Financial. Cardboard box of her belongings in one arm, and Tommy pressed against her side with the other. The October wind cut through her thin blazer, and the sky overhead was the color of old pewter, heavy with the promise of rain. Tommy looked up at her with his big brown eyes. So much like his father's had been before, David decided that being a parent was too hard, and disappeared into the night. Are we in trouble, Mama? Jessica knelt down, so she was at his eye level, setting the box aside. No, baby, we're not in trouble. Sometimes grown-ups make decisions that don't make sense, but that doesn't mean we did anything wrong. Are you? Sad? Jessica looked at her son's face, flushed with fever but still trusting. Still believing that somehow his mama would fix everything the way she always did. She thought about the $47 in her checking account, the stack of unpaid bills on there, kitchen table, and the inhaler in her purse that was almost empty. No, she said, and was surprised to realize it was almost true. I'm not sad, I'm angry. And sometimes being angry is better than being sad because it means we're going to fight. Fight who? Fight for us, Tommy? Fight for our life? She picked up the box and took his hand. As they walked down the busy street, Jessica made herself a promise. She would find another job. She would keep Tommy healthy and safe. She would prove that being a single mother didn't make her weak or unreliable. She just had to figure out how behind them. Unnoticed in the third-floor window of Morrison Financial, a man in an expensive suit watched them disappear into the crowd. Daniel Kane, CEO of Kane Industries, had been meeting with Margaret Morrison about a potential acquisition when he'd witnessed the entire scene through the glass conference room walls. He'd seen the way Jessica held her son, protective and fierce, even in defeat. He'd seen the quiet dignity with which she'd faced humiliation, and he'd seen something else, something that stirred a memory buried deep in his chest. 35 years ago, he'd been that little boy, sick and scared in places he didn't belong. While his mother did whatever it took to survive, Daniel pulled out his phone and dialed his assistant. Cancel my afternoon meetings, he said quietly. Get me everything you can on Jessica Rivera. Hidden blessings. 2 weeks after losing her job at Morrison Financial, Jessica Rivera had learned to swallow her pride in ways she never thought possible. She'd applied to 37 jobs from retail clerk to night janitor and received 37 rejections. The moment potential employers learned she'd been terminated, their polite interest evaporated like morning dew. Tommy was getting sicker. Without insurance, his asthma medication had become a luxury they couldn't afford. Jessica rationed his inhaler like liquid gold, watching helplessly as her son struggled to breathe through the night. She'd sold everything of value they owned, pawned her grandmother's ring, and still came up short. Now she stood outside the towering glass monument that housed Kane Industries, clutching a worn resume and trying to convince herself she had nothing left to lose. The job listing had been almost too good to be true. Administrative assistant. Excellent benefits. Childcare assistance available. It felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. The lobby was all marble and steel, intimidating in its perfection. Jessica felt acutely aware of her second-hand blazer and scuffed shoes as she approached the reception desk. The woman behind it looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine, all sleek hair and designer clothes. I'm here about the administrative position, Jessica said, handing over her application. The receptionist, whose nameplate read Sophia Chen, smiled warmly. Of course, Mr. Kane is expecting you. Jessica blinked. Mr. Kane? I thought I'd be interviewing with HR. Mr. Kane personally reviews all candidates for this position. Sophia gestured toward the elevator bank. 32nd floor. He's waiting for you now. The elevator ride felt eternal. Jessica's hands shook as she tried to smooth down her hair and check her appearance in the polished steel doors. Why would the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation interview someone for an entry-level position? It didn't make sense. The 32nd floor was quiet luxury. Thick carpets, muffled sound, and original artwork lined the walls. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and silver hair met her at the elevator. Ms. Rivera? I'm Helen Walsh, Mr. Kane's executive assistant. Right this way." They walked down a hushed corridor lined with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city. At the end of the hall, Helen knocked softly on a set of double doors. "Come in." Jessica stepped into the largest office she'd ever seen. It was elegant, but somehow warm, with deep leather chairs, built-in bookshelves, and a massive desk that seemed to float in the space. Behind that desk sat a man who made her breath catch in her throat. Daniel Kane was not what she expected. Maybe 45, with dark hair touched by silver at the temples and eyes the color of storm clouds. He was handsome in the way of men who'd earned their confidence through struggle rather than privilege. When he stood to greet her, his smile was genuine, creating small lines around his eyes that suggested he laughed often. "Ms. Rivera, please, sit." He gestured to one of the chairs across from his desk. "Thank you for coming." Jessica sat carefully, her back straight, hands folded. In her lap, "Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Kane." He studied her for a moment, and Jessica had the strange feeling he was seeing more than just another job applicant. "Tell me about yourself," he said finally. Jessica launched into her prepared speech about her work experience, her education, her skills. But Daniel held up a gentle hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "I've read your resume," he said quietly. "It's impressive. What I want to know is who you are. Tell me about your son." The question caught Jessica completely off guard. "My son? Tommy, isn't it? 6 years old?" Jessica's heart began to race. How did he know about Tommy? Had someone from Morrison Financial called him? Was this some kind of setup? "How do you watch there?" Daniel said simply. "At Morrison Financial 2 weeks ago, I saw what happened in that conference room." The blood drained from Jessica's face. She started to stand. "If you brought me here to humiliate me further, please sit." His voice was firm, but not unkind. "I brought you here because I was impressed." "Impressed?" Jessica sank back into the chair, confused. Daniel leaned back, his eyes distant. 38 years ago, my mother was a night janitor at the Ritz-Carlton downtown. It was 7 years. Old, and she had no choice but to bring me with her sometimes. I'd sleep in supply closets while she cleaned rooms. Eat leftover room service food she'd sneak out, and try to stay invisible so she wouldn't get fired. Jessica's breath caught. She began to understand why he'd really called her here. One night, the hotel manager caught us, just like what happened to you at Morrison. Fired her on the spot, called security, had us escorted out like criminals. Daniel's jaw tightened at the memory. My mother cried in the parking lot that night. I'd never seen her cry before. I promised myself that if I ever had the power to change things for someone like her, I would, Mr. Kane. My mother worked 3 jobs after that to keep us afloat. Cleaned offices at night, worked in a diner during the day, took in laundry on weekends. I watched her sacrifice everything for me, never complaining, never giving up. He leaned forward. When I saw you hold your ground in that conference room, protect your son with such dignity, even as they humiliated you, I saw her. Hey, Jessica felt. Tears threatening. Why are you telling me this? It's because I want to offer you something more than just a job. Daniel opened his desk drawer and pulled out a folder. I want to offer you a future, slid the folder across the desk. Jessica opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a contract, but not for the administrative position she'd applied for. This was for something called Community Outreach Director. With a salary that made her gasp, I don't understand. Kane Industries is launching a new initiative. Childcare assistance for working parents, educational scholarships, emergency support funds. Now need someone who understands struggle to run it. Someone who knows what it's like to choose between rent and medicine for their child. At the numbers on the page, the salary alone was 3 times what she'd made at Morrison. But there was more. Full medical benefits, child care vouchers. Even a signing bonus that would cover Tommy's medication for the next year. This is too much, she whispered. You don't even know me. I know enough. Daniel's voice was quiet but certain. No. You worked at Morrison Financial for 2 years without a single complaint about your performance. I know you've never missed a rent payment, even when it meant you didn't eat for 2 days. Hey, no. You've sold everything you own to pay for your son's medicine. How could you possibly know that? Because I did the same things once. Because I recognize the look of someone who's fighting for the person they love most. Daniel stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city. My mother died when I was in college. Cancer. She worked herself to death, literally. I've spent every day since then wishing I could have helped her the way someone should have helped us when I was 7. Jessica felt tears spilling down her cheeks. Mr. Kane, I don't know what to say. Say yes. He turned back to face her. Help me build something that makes sure no other mother has to choose between her job and her child's health. But I'm not qualified for this. I don't have experience with you, have the only experience that matters. You've lived it. Psst. Daniel returned to his desk and pulled out another folder. This contains information about Kane Industries Childcare Center.
Oh.
It's on the 5th floor. Tommy would have a spot there starting tomorrow if you accept. Jessica opened the folder and gasped again. The childcare center looked like something from a dream. Bright, cheerful rooms filled with toys and books. A nurse's station equipped to handle medical needs like asthma. Small class sizes with qualified teachers. There's more, Daniel said gently. He handed her a third folder. Educational trust fund for Tommy. Full scholarship through college if he chooses to go. Jessica's hands shook so badly she could barely hold the papers. Why? She whispered. Why are you doing this? Daniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain and hard-won wisdom. Because 38 years ago, no one helped us when we needed it most. Because your son deserves the chances I didn't have. Because sometimes the universe gives you the opportunity to break a cycle, and you don't waste it. The contracts, at the promise of security she'd never dared to hope for. What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough? Then you'll learn. You'll grow. You'll try again. Daniel's smile was warm and encouraging. The woman who held her head high while being fired for protecting her child doesn't know how to fail. She only knows how to fight. Jessica wiped her eyes and looked at the man who was offering to change her life. When do I start? Tomorrow, if you're ready. Tommy can come with you to see the childcare center, meet his new teachers. Small classes, medical support, educational enrichment. Daniel's eyes sparkled with something that might have been mischief. And the best part? No one will ever make him feel unwelcome for being there. Jessica signed the contracts with a hand that gradually grew steadier. As she wrote her name, she thought about the promise she'd made to Tommy on the sidewalk outside Morrison Financial. She'd said they would fight for their life. She just hadn't expected to find an ally in the battle. 6 months later, Jessica stood in the same office, but everything had changed. She wore a tailored suit that fit perfectly, her hair styled professionally, confidence radiating from every line of her body. In her hands was a report detailing the success of Kane Industries' new community outreach program. 43 families served in our first quarter, she told Daniel, who sat behind his desk listening with obvious pride. 15 children now in our childcare program. 8 emergency medical situations resolved. For mothers able to return to work because of our support. And Tommy? Jessica's smile was radiant. Straight A's. His asthma is under perfect control thanks to the medical team. He wants to be a businessman when he grows up. Says he wants to help families like you helped us. Daniel laughed, the sound rich and warm. Smart kid. The smartest. Jessica set the report on his desk. Daniel, I need to ask you something. Over the months, their relationship had evolved from boss and employee to something deeper. Not romantic, but the kind of friendship forged in mutual respect and shared purpose. They were two people who understood struggle and had chosen to transform it into strength. Ask away. Why didn't you tell me until last week that you'd paid for Tommy's medical treatments for the entire year before I even started working here? Daniel had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. How did you find out? Dr. Martinez mentioned it when I went to pick up Tommy's new prescription. Said someone had already covered all of Tommy's care for the next 12 months starting from the day after I was fired from Morrison. Daniel Kane, you paid for my son's medical care before you even hired me. Before you knew if I'd accept the job. I couldn't let a child suffer while I figured out how to help properly. Jessica felt tears threatening again. But these were different from the desperate tears of 6 months ago. These were tears of gratitude so profound it felt like reverence. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for seeing us, for caring, for giving us a chance at the life I never dared to dream of." Daniel stood and walked around his desk. Without hesitation, Jessica stepped forward and hugged him. It was the embrace of family, of people who had found each other across the vast loneliness of the world and chosen to hold on. "Thank you," Daniel said quietly, "for letting me help. For giving me the chance to keep a promise I made to a 7-year-old boy a long time ago." They stood there in the golden afternoon light streaming through the windows. Two survivors who had learned that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with the darkest moments. And somewhere 5 floors below, a little boy with curly brown hair was learning to read. His breathing clear and easy, surrounded by friends who had never known him as anything other than welcome. The cycle was broken. The promise was kept. And love, as it always does when it's real, had found a way.